Okay, I'm going to give it a second because I can never tell when it actually goes live, so I don't want to be cut off in the middle of introducing you. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. It's Tori. Tonight I am super excited because I have another writer friend of mine on the channel to chat about her amazing book, which I have just recently read. Super excited about it. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself and your book?
Hi. So I wrote The Assassin of Grins and Secrets, a dark fantasy novel. But my first published work was actually poetry, Let the Hurt Girl Heal or Speak. And I have two other poetry books, Sonder and Mori and Let the Hurt Girl Speak. So those are my original babies. So very, very different than dark fantasy. But I always wanted to write a dark fantasy, and it's very near and dear to my heart. So those are my books.
Nice. And I have read, I think, no, I'm still missing Let the Hurt Girl Heal. I have not read, but everything else of yours I have read now. And that's something I want to get into that I kind of forgot to put in the questions that I might get into with you a little bit later is the that you can tell when someone's a poet when you read their novel, and a lot of the description and stuff that you use feels very much like a poet appreciating the, colors and descriptions of the world, and it's very beautiful. So for anyone who has not checked out Katie's book yet, the first thing I'm going to say is, hi, Anitha. I'm not here. Well, hi anyways. All of Katie's links to her website and to purchase Assassin of Grins and Secrets is in the description box below, so you can go check that out. If you have the option to get the hardcover of this book, it is beautiful. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite self-pub hardcovers or hardcovers in general on my shelf right now. I love it to death. So there's one other housekeeping thing I was going to mention. Oh, we're going to do, I better put that banner up before I forget. We are going to do a spoiler-free chat. And then if we so choose, at the end of the live stream, we can go over and chat a little bit of spoilers at the end for those who have read the book. So the first question that I have for you is, what drew you in? You said you've always wanted to write dark fantasy. So what was it about dark fantasy that pulled you into the genre?
So it's a really hard question. I blame Mark Lawrence, honestly. So that was my first introduction into like grimdark and dark fantasy, of just kind of diverging from what I grew up with. I loved Tolkien. I loved things like Harry Potter growing up, and Game of Thrones, which I kind of classify as dark fantasy most of the time because it's really gritty. And it was just like that kind of realism I really liked, where it's not like, oh my gosh, it's just a hero going on a journey and everything's good, even though they kind of suffer along the way and everything turns out well in the end. I liked the exploration of, well, what if these characters are not the best and they're just having to go about whatever is happening in the book the best way that they can. I liked the messiness, I think, that dark fantasy offers, where it's not like super heroic. It's not like Dragonlance or any of the series where it's like we got a clear hero and we can really tell it's like almost this aura around them. And whereas dark fantasy, it's almost a little more like anyone can be the protagonist or the main character, but it doesn't necessarily make them a hero. And how can we have a good story around that? So that was just what always fascinated me, of just also having these broken kind of characters, or characters that were just messy. So
yeah, I totally get it. That's one of the big draws for me in dark fantasy too, and we'll get into that later, because Serene is an excellent example of a very messy dark fantasy protagonist. Because I don't know, would you consider her a hero? Like, do you put that label on her?
I would say no. She may be in a position where she has to do something to help others, but it's definitely, I wouldn't consider heroic. I would
Will
say
she do
revenge
it
is
though?
very much. That's a good question. Who knows?
Maybe I will,
know, but
maybe I
who
won't.
knows?
All right, we have a few people who are saying hi. Let's see. Kay is here. Hi, Kay. Anitha is not here, so we won't expose her. Meredith's are here. I saw Bo jump in. Oh, yep, here he is. Hi, Bo. All right, so going kind of launching off of our intro of Serene, we see a lot of female assassin archetypes. I feel like that's kind of its own subgenre of fantasy. I feel like at this point there's a lot of draw to that, and I felt like in this one you gave a really fresh twist to that archetype because, you know, like I said in my review, usually you think of the female assassin story as this woman who's, you know, cloaked and she's running across the rooftops and, you know, assassinating people at midnight and then going back to her lair and that kind of thing. And this is a very different version of that story. So I was wondering why, first of all, why you chose to write specifically a female assassin as a main character, but also why you chose to tell this version of that story, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think my first introduction to like kind of the female assassin world was with Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass. Younger high school me thought the books were good, read it a second time, and then decided it was not good. Because again, like we had this assassin, but she was more defined by like her looks and everything. And I mean, she did, I guess, kind of kill people. I think I don't remember. So I was like, well, what if we had an assassin who wasn't based on their looks and they couldn't use seduction, which is typically, you know, what's expected of female assassins, or, you know, dressing in a way that's very, you know, just sensual and everything like that. It's like, what if we just had, you know, a woman who kills people?
Take all of the extra stuff off.
All of the extra stuff off. And so really just kind of taking that all away of like, okay, so she really does have to rely on her skills, like what all goes into assassinations. If we're, you know, not using poisons, you know, lock picking, all these things. And also I really loved Assassin's Creed as a teenager. And so playing that of just kind of seeing, you know, okay, these are the things that go into building an assassin, but we don't see a whole lot of that with females assassins beyond, you know, women of the night kind of thing. So it was just really fun to dive into that. It's like, what else is going to drive this character? If it's not love, if it's not, you know, something else, like how can we, you know, build this character? So that was just really what into going for Serene. Is like, okay, she's got revenge on the mind. What is it revenge for? You know, it's more selfishness on her part, which I really liked exploring. So it wasn't, you know, the typical story of, okay, she finds love and becomes a better person, which, you know, I'm not opposed to that, but I was just like, it was so overdone at some time. So I'm like, we've got this woman who is confident, maybe a little too confident in herself, and just what is she going to do to get what she wants? So
yeah, well, and you literally challenge that stereotype right out the gate, because in the first few pages that we meet her, and this is non-spoiler because it's literally in like the first 10 pages, she's kind of horribly like disfigured and, you know, in a prison with kind of lice crawling all over her. Like,
that was the most uncomfortable part for me to write.
I bet. Because yeah, it's like, so you know that female assassin trope? Gone.
What if we add lice?
Right. Which kind of immediately set the tone, and that kind of, you know, talking about the seduction and that kind of archetype, that you're right, it is very common in this kind of a character. Now that you say that, I'm like, you're right, they always do rely on that, and that's really annoying. But it was really refreshing because you have, and we're going to talk a little bit about the other star players in here, but it was really refreshing to me to read 3 POVs, 1 female, 2 male, and it's not a love triangle. I just want to say thank you for that. It was
You're
so
welcome.
it was so refreshing. And yeah, I think part of that, we get to spend so much more time getting to know the nuances of each of these individual characters instead of they're being defined by, like you said, their looks or their relationship romantically with each other. So that's kind of a brief introduction to Serene. So do you want to introduce the other 2 the boys,
Yes.
the other two POVs, and let's start with that, and then I'm going to ask you kind of like why those three were the right three to tell the story.
Yeah, so going off the love triangle, that was also another thing I always disliked. I'm not an insta love kind of reader. I
Thank
do
you.
love a good like, the tropes of, oh my gosh, there's only one bed. It's like, okay, I kind of like that at certain points if it's well deserved. So I was like, well, let's not do that right now because she's not the kind of character to, kind of fall into that. And so with Ramesses, I really wanted a character who is kind of this golden child who, is very knowledgeable about the world, but kind of still naive to it. And so he's my, yes, my sweet boy who loves his dogs. He really just likes the finer things in life. He's a romantic. So just kind of put that there. He's like, he's going to read the romance books. He's going to see the best in people. And he wants ultimately what's good for his country and is in kind of this tough spot. So that's why he goes and finds her. So he was kind of one of the more challenging ones because I'm like, all right, well, we can't make him immediately sad. Whereas, Serene and Uriah are my other two brooding
They're the rain
characters.
clouds.
So I was like, all right, we need this balance between everyone else with the cynicism, the jadedness, and everyone else struggling. But still kind of having him come into awareness of what's going on with what's really going on with his kingdom, his family, and everything else, and how is that going to affect a character like him who is not prone to despair, while still kind of balancing the optimism in there. So he was just a fun character to write. It was challenging because I was like, well, he's charming, but we don't want him to be like really like going having the hots for everyone. So I was just like, let's try and figure out like a character like that. So
Yeah.
he's got his faults for sure, but he's the idealist, which I really found refreshing after working through his character for so long. And then Uriah, I don't know, he's not the favorite of my children that I've created, but a little bit of the favorite just because he needs to sleep and I feel bad for him. So yeah, him who is the oldest of the trio, who's had a little bit more life experience. He served as a soldier, so he's coming at everything from a different kind of perspective. He's very stoic anyway, and so very much an introvert, whereas Ramesses is the extrovert. So he, is there to be Ramesses' friend, also his kind of conscience and maybe say this is not a good idea. Let's ground ourselves a little bit. And so he's very much kind of overcoming his own traumas and just where he's at in life between like duty, friendship, and what his moral code is. So he's really, he's the moral backbone of this whole story. And Ramesses brings the optimism and Serene brings the chaos. So
yeah, it's something I always really appreciate, and I talk about this so often on my channel, is how much I appreciate a group or motley crew of characters who has a lot of distinctions between each individual and how they do play off. So like, now that you say that, it cracks me up because Ramesses and Uriah are just the token like introvert and extrovert friends. Like Ramesses is constantly like, hey, let's go do this thing, let's go check stuff out, and Uriah's like, really, do we have to? Can we just stay here?
He's like, I gotta work and maybe sleep. Who knows?
Right. Yeah. And the other thing I think was cool about Ramesses, because he ended up being, I think, my favorite character of the three throughout pretty much the whole book, which is kind of odd for me. I'm kind of impressed with him, actually. I'm like, of course, I'm like loving the ray of sunshine in this dark fantasy book. But there's not like, he's very young. So there's that level of kind of naivete to him, but he never felt immature to me. Like, he felt young and like there were still a lot of things he hasn't seen in life, but there was never a moment where he kind of went too far over to the like spoiled brat prince character, which I feel like is another archetype that you very expertly stayed away from. Because he has those kind of like flavors of you know, he's easy on the eyes, and he's used to people like, oh, there's the prince, and kind of, but he's also has such a good heart and wanting to know what's actually going on in his kingdom, and all of that kind of stuff. So I really appreciated that about him. So I wanted to do a little gush fest of Ramesses while we were talking about characters.
That's good because, you know, I don't know. At first, someone in my writers group was like, "Well, I didn't like him at first." I'm like, "Okay, that's fair." Serene didn't like him either, so it's okay.
Yep.
But yeah, I think out of all the character development, he was the one that was the hardest, but also the most fulfilling, just to see him just kind of grow, and then also seeing the areas he still needs to grow in as the books progress. Because I really wanted him. It's like, yeah, he could still be spoiled, but also he wasn't originally brought up as like, you're gonna be king one day, because his father is like the second son, so it's like they were there. So I was like, how can I kind of draw that in? So he's still, you know, privileged, but maybe a little more down to earth than he kind of realizes. He just, you know, wants to read and do archery and have his dogs and stay single forever. I always think of the Brave quote where it's like, you know, my hair's flowing in the winds, firing arrows. It's like, that's Ramesses.
Okay, there's a question. Anitha says, yesterday Patricia talked about how she bakes recipes, which are mentioned in the book, and how she dresses from the period. Do you also dress like an assassin and kill people?
Well, I was telling Tori before this that I have a hard time killing my own characters, so I'm not good at that. I also am just, I'm not a good liar, so I don't think I'd be very good at. I do own several bladed weapons. And fun tangent story. So I was cleaning one of my shelves and I had removed one of my daggers and put it on my bed, forgot it was there. And then I had woken up one morning and I'd reached under my pillow and I was like, what is this? And then I found the dagger there and I was like, oh gosh, what is that? So, I mean, in theory, it's possible, but no, I do
So
not.
Katie sleeps with a dagger under her pillow, confirmed, is what I'm
Confirmed
hearing.
by accident. It is nearby on the shelf, though.
Within
Whether or
arm's
not
reach.
whether or not I'm competent to use it or not, I actually do not like pain like that. So bladed weapons scare me, but they're really pretty. So it's a hard line. So I would not be a very good assassin. I would, yeah. So I would die immediately.
I feel like there would be a "I'm so sorry" involved
Yeah,
somewhere.
I'd be like, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. That was an accident.
Ooh,
I don't know
my
how this
bad.
knife got here.
Did I do that?
Sarah wants to know, yes. So I'm going to give you guys a close up, and then Katie, would you let us know who the artist is for this beautiful cover?
So I actually found her on Tumblr because she did a bunch of Dragon Age fan art, and I absolutely loved it. So her name is JD May, and she's on Instagram and Tumblr. And so I just reached out to her one day. I was like, "Hey, can you do this cover?" So I have her doing my book 2 cover, and for my upcoming project, she's also done the cover for that, as well as the art that's on my prints and my bookmarks. So she is really amazing, really awesome, and listens to all of all of my suggestions, which are very detailed, and taking whatever random image I have that I can't draw very well. So, and then all the interior art I just did on Canva, except for the daggers, I did actually draw those. So, but she is amazing, and I love her art so much.
This is such a beautiful cover. I absolutely love it. This was honestly, like, other than the fact that I was friends with you and wanted to read your book, this cover would have sold me immediately, not knowing you at all, because it's absolutely stunning, and especially in person. And the hardcover, I think I have shown off this book in at least 4 or 5 videos on my channel now. So yeah, it's very beautiful inside and out. There's a lot of really cool details on the inside with the chapter headers and everything. Yes.
I always wanted to make a pretty book. I was like, if nothing else, it looks nice on the shelf.
It's a pretty good story too. I think you matched both.
That's also the added bonus, is that it's hopefully
it's
a good
also
story
good on the inside
to match the cover.
Bo, I like the sweet, friendly version of Katie. I know if she's secretly a killer, I'm gonna have to learn to sleep with one eye open. Maybe it's all a facade.
I'm not a good liar. I can just say that. So I'm not good at poker, and yeah, my face unfortunately likes to turn only 2 shades. It's either red or pale. So yeah,
Same. I can feel that.
yeah. So it doesn't take much, but
Hey, Matt. Alan shows up. Hi, Alan. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, and I'm kind of hearing you say that about Ramesses a little bit too. Is like, you know, writing, and I know Andrew Meredith has said this before too. Writing characters that you don't identify with is more work, and like, I feel like that's more of a like, I did it when you can come up with a character like, yep, I don't know that I identify with this, but I pulled it off. Matt says blade weapons, love the dagger under the pillow. Yeah, so I was going to have you answer this question at the end, but can you at least give us like, and I'll have you reiterate it at the end. Can you tell us a little bit about sorry, I have small helpers coming into my room suddenly.
That's fine.
Can you tell us a little bit about your next project and what it's going to be?
Yeah, so this is a complete divergence from what I normally have been writing. I guess it's romance fantasy. I don't know. Romance is in there, but it's not like the main plot. So, as I said, once upon a time, I said I would never write romance, and here we are. I was like, oh, let's do a married couple, but one's a
Never say never.
necromancer and one's a healer, and then they have a chicken. So it's called Hills of Heather and Bone, and so basically, my main character is a necromancer, and she has to go on the run with her husband because people are chasing them, and it's just kind of more of a family adventure story, I would say, but also kind of exploring themes of grief, mental health, and all these things with just this character. So I've had a lot of fun with it. And I originally did not plan to write it. I had seen something on the internet one time where someone's like, "Oh, a necromancer couple." I was like, "That sounds fun." Wrote it down somewhere, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, let's write a story." And so last March, I wrote a story, and here we are. I'm aiming for May, a May release. I'm not sure. We'll see how it all goes.
Yeah, kind of a
Oh,
like.
someone asked a Dragon Age question. Oh man, I
Yeah,
missed it.
I'm getting to you, Alan. Calm down. So Dragon Age, I know that you are a fan of, correct?
Little
So
understatement, yes.
Alan wants to know more.
Hmm. Well, the artist, she had done some really good Cassandra art. And she was the only one who responded to me. There was another great artist who did Dragon Age art, but she never got back to me. So here we are. But yes, Dragon Age is also a very fun place in my heart. Severin was also my favorite assassin character, just with the fact that he couldn't lockpick unless you like leveled him up, and it's a joke in the story. So lockpicking is important. So yeah, I always play the rogue characters in that, which is also my favorite character to write. But yes, really
Nice.
love Dragon Age.
So is Serene then kind of like a rogue assassin,
Yeah,
technically?
yeah, I gave her the double blades and everything,
Oh
so
yeah.
I was
There's
like,
no faster way to my heart than a dual wielding character.
mm,
There just isn't.
it's fun.
It's so much fun. Matt, let's see. There's a lot of conversation around this dagger under your pillow.
Like I said, I don't know how I didn't hurt myself. It is a miracle because I am very accident prone. So yeah.
Is this Lana or Jord? Hi.
The Indian
Whichever
Quartz
it
has gained sentience, so it's just
it's just its own.
the
It's
Indian
like
Quartz.
the sentient spaceships.
Yes.
Yeah, the cover is gorgeous. Yes, Alan. You've said my name 3 times. Okay, he needs to. I don't know what any of this means, but he needs to know your opinion on Ander.
I will admit, when I played the second game, I did not know what I was doing and somehow ended up in a romance with him, and I regretted it instantly. So he's interesting as not a romance character, and I also don't like making poor decisions in the dialogue tree. I always like to try and, not make people mad. So I didn't kill him. But he's problematic. and I can see why he did what he did, but I do not endorse doing. Okay, to be fair, Alan, it was an accident because I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was being nice, but then it turned out to be the
So, I
romance
don't know,
option.
this is cracking me up. So I have heard an interview, and this is a tangent, but it ties in, I promise. Hi, Lana. There's a story about Rupert Grint, who played Ron Weasley in the Harry Potter. I can't talk tonight. I apologize. Harry
That
Potter
series.
films. That one. And apparently, like, he's just the nicest guy, and he like keeps getting into trouble because he continues to say yes to people when
Yeah.
he shouldn't, and like ends up, going to people's houses and like whatever. And I kind of feel like there's maybe like that would be Katie as an assassin, like just
Be
the
bad.
continue. That's the gameplay for Katie, is just continuing to say yes to everybody,
Yes.
because it's can't say no. I don't want to say no.
But in answer to Alan's question, no, I immediately deleted that playthrough once I realized what was happening, because I never played the second game before, and then I was like, okay, we're not doing that again. So I really didn't like to keep him in my party. I preferred Meryl. I mean, I also like the fact that he liked cats, so I think that was also the reason I tolerated him. But I mean, he had a whole manifesto. The guy's got problems. So yeah, it was not great. Not a
This
great
is a
playthrough.
great question, Anita. Every time Alan comes on my chats, he's got to always bully everybody here. This is the Perry. Yeah, basically, John. Okay, well, getting back to Assassin of Grins and Secrets, now that we've gone on to Dragon Age and Harry Potter. So where were we? We were talking about the we were talking about the three POVs characters, and you talked a little bit about the contrast between the three of them and where they came from. So one of the things I really appreciated about it was your dialogue, and how the banter between each set of the three characters was so authentic to that pairing, because Serene bantering with Uriah was completely different than Serene bantering with Ramesses, and then Uriah and Ramesses with their best friend banter. So what are your approaches / tips to writing dialogue? Because I felt like that was something that you really did a great job walking that line between cheeky and funny and cheesy, and always staying on the right side of it.
So I don't know. My default is usually to go to sarcasm or some sort of joke. But usually, like when I'm writing dialogue, it's not while I'm in front of the page. I'll usually think of like a line of dialogue and then write that down and write a scene around it. So not to sound crazy, but I would kind of hold these conversations with myself about how this would go and what I thought would be either funny, cutting, snarky, or, just really what's going to fit that character. Because, Uriah is not a joker. So I'm like, if he pulls one, it needs to be good. And whereas Ramesses is probably going to be a little more suave and maybe say something a little more tongue-in-cheek, whereas Serene's going to be, we're going to cut you. So really trying to balance those ones, and then just knowing like, how is this going to come off to this character in this moment? What's the point of it? So really, I hate like talking my dialogue out loud, so it just kind of not seem less crazy. So just keep it inside and see if it sounded good. But I always appreciate like good witty banter and dialogue and something that flows. So yes, sarcasm is a good default.
It's funny though.
It's a family trait.
I feel like though sarcasm is also still something that's hard to write in a way, to like know what the balance of too much and how to write the sarcasm, and because the sarcasm within your characters sounds very different depending on who's being sarcastic. They definitely have their own voice, which I thought was really cool. The foodies will love this book.
Mhm.
Like, your food descriptions are there were several times I was so hungry reading this book. It was like, this
That was
all
also
sounds
one of my dreams as an author, is
so
just to
good.
make people hungry.
Well, it's because I read a lot of, like, Brian Jakes Redwall books when I was younger, and the
Mhm.
descriptions of food in those are just
Yes.
so good, and this was like, I mean, I'm ready to go to your world and just pull up at a restaurant and just I'll have one of everything because it all sounded so good. Um, so can you talk a little bit about how the food adds to the world building and why that was such a big piece of it for you?
So I will blame the Redwall books as
Fair.
shaping my early childhood, and just also I grew up with a lot of food shows, and I always liked the ones that kind of brought in, like, cultural aspects, but also showing, regional foods and
Mhm.
everything. So one, and then also because Serene was starving for like 2 years, I'm like, this girl got to eat. We got to get her some good food, so at least it's worthwhile.
Yep.
And also to satisfy me, who was like, I really like these foods. They sound good. Let's write about them. But for me, like, culture is so built around food in
Mhm.
so many ways that we don't realize. So I was like, how can this be a reflection of, demographics, social structures, class, even, and also how can this be a reflection of characters? Like, what are their tastes? What do they dislike? Are they going to eat all their food? Are they going to separate all their food, kind of thing? So really, just kind of using that also as a character analysis tool
Mhm.
for me, and then also to kind of help describe the world. Like, if figs exist, wasps exist. So that was like
Right.
my under the little way of showing, here's how maybe these things exist, here's how maybe this is a coastal region, or if they have a lot of imports, that shows money. So it was like, those were the things I was thinking about. Also, I'm like, okay, if they've got gold leaf in their food, obviously they must be really, you know rich. And then also,
Mhm.
like, the question I ran into myself, I'm like, does this world have chocolate? If so, awesome. If not, this is sad. But why wouldn't chocolate exist? Because that's one of my things. I'm like, if we're in an Arctic region and someone's got citrus, I'm like, what's the explanation? Where did this come from? So I really wanted
Mhm.
it to be a reflection of the localized setting we're in, but then also how does this reflect the bigger world in terms of, like, economics and just how does food move?
Mhm.
And I just also really like food, so that was fun.
Yeah. I was that is some of I would say that's some of the best food description I've read in a book since Redwall. So you've nailed it, at least in my opinion. Um, Patricia wants to know, going back to dialogue briefly, do you have any particular books or shows that you watch or read to help get into those banter dialogue moments?
Mm, let me look at my shelf because I don't know off the top of my head. Oh, that's so hard. Um, I think I always look at books that don't have a whole lot of chunky dialogue. That usually
Mm,
starts to kind of draw me out of it. Although I do have some chunky dialogue. Um, but I can always tell in more of a fantasy book if it's kind of going more towards epic, because the dialogue is usually longer and not as quick,
mhm,
and it doesn't always help with the pacing. So I don't know of any particular books off the top of my head, because there's a lot that I really like the dialogue from. But Princess Bride was also good for dialogue, so that was a little bit of inspiration, just how they would get quips in real quick,
mhm.
and it didn't quite take away from the moment. It wasn't like, that's weird. Why did we say that? Because there are some books I've read where it's like, why did we jump from, topic A to topic B and then go somewhere to topic Z? And I liked seeing the flow of dialogue and how it could be grouped together. That's just my writing style. Sometimes dialogue is chaotic depending on the
Mhm.
scene or what's happening. But for me, I like to see, like, the flow, and I can always tell in a book, it's like, okay, we have digressed from the subject at hand and I don't know how we got here. um, so really just, yeah, I don't know of any good books. I'm sure I'll think of them afterwards.
I mean, Princess Bride
But
is a pretty
usually,
good, uh, example just based on like, it's a very similar feel, I think.
mhm.
With
And when I talk about Princess Bride, I'm talking about the movie. I have read the books, but it's been many years. So, and then I also wanted dialogue that was going to fit the character. I love Tolkien to death, but honestly, sometimes the dialogue feels very the same for each character, unless there's like an accent. So it's just like, okay, well, Serane's not going to talk this way, the same way that Ramesses talks this way, and Uriah's not going to talk the same way to Serane as he talks to Ramesses. So it's just like taking those things into consideration. How is the dialogue going to change depending on scene and character was the thing that also helped to differentiate them and really solidify the POVs I was going for, because I didn't want them to all be the same.
Yeah. Patricia wants to know if you bake any of or have made any of the food descriptions that you use.
So I have done spiced lamb before. It's very time consuming, but very good. Although amazing. I'm not a huge fan of lamb, ironically. I haven't tried a whole lot of the bread recipes. I do have a cookbook that's Moroccan that I really want to dive into when I have time. I've made a couple desserts. And I've gone to some other places that have the foods that I really love. So I do want to bake more. There's just time.
Right.
Because these are not quick recipes, unfortunately. A lot of them are, slow cooker kind of ones. They take a while. But I have made the spiced lamb, and it's very good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things a lot of people don't talk about is there's all these amazing feasts, but the time that it takes to prep a lot of these dishes would be like a half day, full day thing.
So. And considering they don't have a convection oven, it's
exactly.
Like, yes, it's going to take a little bit longer to do all this stuff.
Sarah says, I've never wanted to eat prairie grass and roots more than when I read Brian Jake's books.
The simple things.
Story. Yeah. I think that's something that honestly more fantasy books could do more of, is because you're right. So much of the culture is built around food, and conversations at dinner tables. And that's such a central part of pretty much any culture.
I'm also when I'm reading and we've gone days and I haven't seen a character eat, I'm just really worried. Personally, I'm like, I see that you've slept, but when was the last time you ate? Do you need food?
Are you okay?
Are you okay? So I really wanted to make sure, okay, my characters are maybe eating. We're going to maybe get a meal and some water and maybe 2 hours of sleep, and then the rest of it's going to be chaos, but it's all about the self-care and the little things.
Right. Yes, Kay, I would highly recommend that you eat or have food available to you when you are reading this book, because it will test your taste buds for sure.
I did add raisins though, unfortunately, so I'm so sorry to those who do not like raisins.
Any anti-raisin people in the chat? John says, dialogue is easy. You just have to balance information dumps, lore dispensing, and character building while also feeling totally natural, not stilted, that your editor says change anyway. See, easy.
Very easy. I don't know why people complain, or we need books on it. You just talk.
Not that hard. Let's see. I think I got through. Oh, raisin. Tori, how many donuts did you consume during the reading? It's funny though, because it's I wasn't craving the sugary stuff. It was there's so many good meat descriptions and the bread and all of just the sauces of things, and I was like, I need a full feast spread, please. But I am fond of donuts also.
I think there are donuts in there, or at least the variation of it.
I think you're right. I remember you described
it's some sort of donut thing is in there. I mean, fried foods given across every culture, right? Made up or otherwise.
Turkey leg.
I don't think there's turkeys in this one. Not
most
in this.
Of it was there's a lot of lamb. There's a lot of lamb. That.
There's pheasants.
Oh yeah. Yep. Moving from the food to a completely different type of world building, I want to talk about writing combat, because that's one of my favorite things in fantasy, and one of the reasons why I love fantasy so much, and historical fiction to some degree. But fight choreography is so difficult to write well. So how, and I felt like it's done very well in Assassin. So how do you approach fight choreography? How do you decide what weapons are being used, how to fight with them, who's moving where? Like, how do you approach those scenes?
So I watched a lot of videos just to help me understand it because I do not know how to fight because I'm scared of pain. Um, so I would watch a lot of those, and also in my writers group, there's one of our friends who actually does fighting and different kinds of things. So she was really helpful in saying, well, maybe a character of this stature is not going to do that. They're going to move this way. They're going to hold a weapon this way. This is, what's safe. So really, I was so thankful for her feedback. I read a lot of books on combat. Just basically that was the thing. I'm like, if I'm going to do anything, I need to get this right. And I was also told maybe just to back off on the details because that helps you a lot, even though I'm like, we need to know the detail of like how they angle the blades. Like that's not really important. So the best advice I ever got was just treat it like it's a block. So it's like one scene that they're moving through, you block out the fight. And what the choreography is going to look like, taking into account, what's around, what is the character doing, who is their opponent, and what kind of weapons are being used. So that was a little bit tricky having to, really consider both sides of it since this is third person, of really just knowing what is the expertise of my character, how are they fighting? Are they at their peak fighting, or is it, really bad situation? And so where can I afford to be very detailed and where can I afford not to, or I can just back off on the details. So that was just trying to really work out and trial and error, just figure out how is this going to be good? Because you don't want a fight scene to be too long, but you don't want it to be too short. So it's a really hard balance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just doing a lot of research and just trying to figure out what is going to be as realistic for a character who knows what they're doing and an author who does not. So
So were there any books that you found particularly helpful when you were researching? For those in the comments who might be curious about that.
Let's see. Fight Right
I've
by
heard of that one.
is good. So I found her through Tumblr, again, the beautiful magic of Tumblr. And so she had actually broken down different things of, how do you do unarmed combat? How do you do combat with a spear or a knife or, those kinds of things. And then also just for world building, I had to look at maybe what are some of the martial arts that might have been used in this kind of setting. How is that going to differ from character to character? So Fight Right was really good. There's a lot of websites I used that were phenomenal. I know there are some books I read that I was like, these are really good fight scenes, and I'm blanking on them. I'm gonna say I think I'm gonna say Prince of Thorns again because that's the one that's just kind of playing on repeat. But I also think Red Rising had some good ones. Oh, and We Hunt the Flame, I think, also had some good stuff because they had an archer and an assassin. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I used some of that because archery was the other one. I was like, okay, I got to consider how are we doing that, especially on horseback, which is very different than just standing there with a bow and an arrow. So I don't know. It was just a lot of research and just hoping that it all made sense. But also, the best advice I had is like, if you couldn't kind of act it out, that's very helpful. So my one friend definitely was very helpful. She also recorded herself doing some stuff and also asked questions to her friends, which was helpful. So if you can find someone who fights, that's very helpful.
Yes.
So you don't have to do the actual fighting and hurt yourself.
I was going to say, I know that there are several martial artists, even within the India Accords, for anybody who is in there. And I think, I'm trying to think who I've heard talk about. Well, I know Joe Byrne, and then my friend Theo from Rekindled Reader also does jujitsu, I believe. So yeah, I know a bunch of even booktubers and authors who would have some good insight probably for that. Andrew says their buddy read, and every time food is described, live stream the recipe with Katie. That would be a lot of food, you guys. There's a lot of food in this book, which I'm not complaining, but it would be a lot of
I think
thinking.
that's most of my glossary is food. So when I think about it.
Yep. Kind of swerving into a little bit, I feel like we did food and then we did fight choreography, so let's talk about mental illness now, because that's a good, like, progression of light to heavier themes. Um, there's a lot of there's a lot of mental illness explored in Assassin, and not just from Sorane's point of view, but that you get a lot of that through Uriah and so how did you decide what you wanted to show and how you were going to represent the mental illness factors in the book?
So I was kind of a tricky situation just figuring out, how can we portray trauma in a way that is talking about it but not making it the whole character's identity, and that was a big thing I wanted to try and avoid, because so often, especially with female characters in books, where any kind of trauma is like what fully defines them. So with
Mhm.
Serena, I was like, okay, she still has this baggage. She's got more baggage that comes along, with just, the sexual assault and just everything that's happened to her, loss, grief, and just all those fear elements. So I was like, well, this is a big part of that shaped her, but let's not make that her whole identity. She can still struggle with that, and it affects her day to day. It affects, what she does. And while she's not necessarily moving towards a healing kind of thing just yet, of, that's the eventual goal, whether she sees it
Mhm.
or not. And,
Mhm.
how are these choices either going to make her a little bit more mentally healthy, or what she thinks is going to make her a little bit more mentally healthy, or what things are going to affect her down the line, because not everything in the moment is going to be kind of processed. So I didn't want it to
Right.
be like, oh gosh, okay, she's solved all her problems, her mental health is completely healed, she's fine. um, and so different things affect her in different situations. I wanted that to be a little bit more natural, at least to make sense for this character.
Mhm.
Just the exploration of trauma for characters in fantasy is always interesting to me, because
Mhm.
sometimes if I'm reading a book where it's like, well, this character has just killed a bunch of people and lost their whole family, but they're fine in 2 pages and don't seem to really be dealing with it, I'm just like, are they though? Are they okay? Are
Sucks.
they also maybe secretly a psychopath? And if it's not like shown like they're repressing a bunch of stuff,
Right.
then I'm just like, I worry about this character now. So I was like, let's just really dive into that, of how can these characters who have maybe a goal in mind also have their own psyche kind of affecting them, rather than it's just the big wide world coming against them.
Mhm.
And with Uriah, it's like he didn't come from kind of the same background, but he still had things that happened to him, and then also choices he made that he lives with, that he's still
Mhm.
trying to process, but he doesn't want to talk about it. And so he really just keeps that down. So it's like, how is this going to come out in his daily life? How's this going to affect him? And then even with Ramesses too, of just,
Mhm.
he's not going to experience the same kind of trauma, but how is he maybe dealing with stress? How is he dealing with anxiety? Even though he's not an anxious person, how can the optimistic introvert or extrovert start to maybe deal with some stuff? Is like,
Mhm.
I'm always interested in the process of sorting through
Mhm.
what has happened to a character while not letting it be the whole thing that defines them.
Right. Yeah. And I noticed too that both Uriah and Serene have kind of these like, without spoiling anything, kind of these points of fixation that
Hmm.
they kind of hold on to, with Uriah having a physical object and Serene having kind of a thing that again, I can't really say anything for spoilers, but there's that kind of fixation of something that keeps pulling them through, or something
Hmm.
that they ground with, I guess. And I thought that that was a really cool aspect of how you portrayed both of their respective traumas. Um,
Yeah, and I oh, and I was gonna just say, like, the joy aspect of it was just a little hard to kind of weave in at times, but I really wanted that to say, like, you know, we can still have these broken characters, but they still have, you know, moments where they're functioning in a sense.
Right.
And, you know, it's not weighing too heavily on them, but for certain ones, it's like that's what is always in the back of their mind, or it's something that, depending on how recent the trauma is, it's going to, you know, either be fresher, it's going to bother them a little more, it's going to come out in different ways. So just really wanted to explore that and see how can we do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and doing it differently between the 3 different individual POVs too. Well, and that's, I mean, as you go through the book and you're uncovering these layers of the characters, I think one of the hard things is knowing how much and when. You know,
Mm-hmm.
how do you pace showing bits and pieces of that past history and where all those layers are coming from at the right points throughout the story? Like, how do you even approach that kind of pacing?
Yeah, that was also more of a difficult thing because I'm like, well, Serene and Uriah are not going to talk to people. They don't have a therapist. So we can't just sit
Right.
down and do that. And Serene, especially because, you know, she doesn't trust anyone except for maybe one person. But even then, it's still hard to, you know, kind of talk about things because there's things she doesn't quite understand
Mm-hmm.
how deeply it's affected her. And that also gets explored in like other books of, you know, what is she repressing, and when is it going to actually be a problem for her?
Mm-hmm.
Because at times she's like, well, this isn't going to be a problem, or this is what's going to drive me. But also just the other things of day-to-day life that aren't necessarily tied to it. But also just saying, you know, like this is still a big chunk of
Mm-hmm.
this character. So, and then, you know, with Uriah, I think he and Serene are very similar, and I kind of did that intentionally, but they're not going to talk about that because
Yeah,
they don't want to necessarily
they're
admit that.
nothing
Like,
alike.
they're not going to share their pain in the same way that Ramesses would say, you know, like, I've also suffered as well. Because at the end of the day, they're all, in a sense, grown up with the war and everything that's
Mm-hmm.
affected them. And so it's going to come out in different ways, whether they realize it or not. And especially with Ramesses, it's like, it's not very evident all the
Mm-hmm.
time that, you know, okay, that's right. He grew up with all this other stuff that's happened, but it's coming out in a very different way,
Yeah.
which book 2's problem for that. So with pacing, it was just, I didn't want it to be an info dump of
Yeah.
like pain and trauma unless there was something that really prompted it. And if
Yeah.
it, because I see that sometimes in fantasy where it's like this character has this big build up moment, they talk about all the things that are on their heart, and either everything's fixed afterwards or it leads to something else. So
Right.
I was like, let's maybe not do that as much here and maybe just drop it in bits and pieces because this is how that character's going to do it. They're not going to spill their guts to
Mm-hmm.
this person just because this thing has happened.
Right.
So making
Yeah.
it very frustrating for them and, you know, challenging what's going to be healthy growth and what's going to be, you know, maybe some negative growth, which
Right.
we're all about in this
And take
series.
2 steps back.
Take 2 steps back.
But I mean, you do touch on, you know, those moments of joy, which are sprinkled throughout this book, which was awesome because it did provide a really good balance. And we talk a lot about um like those more moments of normalcy, no matter how dark or how much kind of fast-paced action is going on in a story, that those moments of normalcy are so important for the character growth. Um, so do you feel like you had a not necessarily easier time with those moments of normalcy, but was that an important thing for you to intersperse within the story to give the characters and the readers kind of some breathing space?
I think so. I really like moments of normalcy. Just,
Mhm.
you know, what are the characters doing when they're not, you know, fighting for their lives or doing anything like that, and not necessarily taking up 50 pages or take, you know, a whole year to get out of the Shire kind of normalcy. But, you know, just what are they going to do when they wake up in the morning? What are they going to do if
Mhm.
they physically can't fight and you have to sit there and, you know, you can't leave your bed kind of thing?
Mhm.
And, you know, how are they going to interact with other characters who aren't the main characters? Is, you know, a good opportunity to just show different interactions. Or maybe he wants to pet a cat. That's normal. I'd want to do that. um, so I just, I liked that because that for me personally was like, this is my little bit of cozy I'm just going to kind of throw in there. in this otherwise, not happy-ish world, or at least set of circumstances. Because I really like that. It's just a nice break from the action, which I think all characters need a little bit. Yeah, it's my way of saying sorry for what's coming.
Well, I think too, like Ramesses, one of the reasons that I really liked him, and he kind of ties in with this, is that he kind of, in my opinion, kind of represents that search for joy. Because there's so many points during the book where you see him actively going out in search of something that brings him joy or brings someone else joy, that he's trying to cheer them up or like, so I think maybe he kind of represents a little bit of that, like that kind of light in the situation of the three characters, and kind of pulls Serene and Uriah out into that a little bit with him, which is quite lovely. But are there anything, we talked a little about, you kind of mentioned before we went live that there were somebody had asked you about underrated like side characters in your book. So what do you want to tell us? Give them a moment of spotlight. Are there any side characters that are interesting, that you want to pull out, that were fun to write in this book?
I really like secondary characters. I find more often, if I don't relate to the main character, I'm always going to find a secondary character. And if I can't find one, that I'm just like, that's sad. They're just fun. And if they're done well, I think they add a lot. I'm trying to think. I really enjoyed Rizwana, just because she was pretty much, besides Ramesses and Uriah, like Serene's other kind of point of contact, but also someone who wasn't as harsh as Serene was used to. Because I mean, she comes into all this with her own set of prejudice and expectations and just being on guard all the time. So this is the person who like literally is seeing her at her most vulnerable, but she's allowing that, in a sense of, okay, if we've got to kind of trust anyone, it's going to be the maidservant. And so just having this character who's not just respected, but kind of respected, like Uriah kind of trusts her, and I mean Ramesses knows her name, so she plays just that important kind of background role, more than I think Serene realizes. Let's see,
she's kind of an anchor character.
She is. My other two, well, no, three, I'll just say three. I really liked Enika, just because it's, again, another person that Serene doesn't have to be in opposition with. Serene's friend, her only friend. So I really liked having that, because she was also kind of just the parallel to Serene of, they grew up in the same kind of environment, but they kind of had two different ways of viewing it, very similar backgrounds. And this is an assassin that, uses her looks and charm to, kill when necessary, but she's not as cynical of the world. And so I wanted that other kind of soft character who understood Serene and could kind of be the counterbalance to her. Racema was also fun, just a small little, child.
And she's Prince Ramesses' younger sister.
Yeah. So she's, again, kind of got the wide-eyed innocence, and also, showing Serene there's other people in the world who, aren't necessarily, you have to be on edge about. And so she has Ramesses' same kind of ideology and just looks of the world, but also wants to know more and is kind of fascinated by her. And then there's Ilderim, who is, Ramesses' guard. So he's also the other voice of reason who is on Ramesses' side. He's been with him longer. He is the oldest person who is kind of there. I think he's maybe in his 40s. So also another kind of person who isn't viewing Serene necessarily as a full-on threat. There's a little bit of respect there, but he can also kind of be the guardrails for when things might be going too far, and just to be that other sounding board that Ramesses needs in his life. So those are my favorite side characters to write.
Yeah. Kaiju says hi, and also totally agree. Side characters are a great way to view the main character. It's a great way to learn more about your main character when you can see them through the eyes of someone else. So yeah, totally agree, Kaiju. So what do you hope that people who read your book, what do you want them to come away with?
So I always say, like, most of the characters are morally gray. They're not going to be great characters all the time. Even Ramesses, like, he's optimistic. He's supposed to not be in the chaotic category, and he's not a killer, but even he makes mistakes, and there's short-sightedness on his part. And so none of these characters are perfect, and they're not meant to be kind of held up to that standard. And especially with Serene, like, her choices are not going to be good. How she views the world isn't necessarily how it actually is. So just taking that into account of her as a character, so, like, things she says, things she does, it's like it's all coming from a place that's a little more guarded. And so just seeing the characters is messy, and when they make their choices or they're not progressing as typical fantasy characters usually do, where we've got this big moment emotionally in character growth, it's like it's going to be a little more of a slow growth depending on the character. And especially for, like, my antagonist, it's like there's only a few that are really terrible. One in particular, who is
not to name any names, but
he is exactly as he seems. There is no redemption for that. But basically, not every character is as they seem. There's always some other layer to it. So that's really what I want readers to keep in mind with all these characters, because they're not perfect. Try to get them as human as possible.
Right? Yeah. Lots of layers. And that again goes back to the pacing and what we, like, talked about, how you're just slowly revealing little bits. And I found that pacing to be really good throughout the whole book, where we're just slowly kind of getting pieces of each of these characters, and even some of the side characters, we're slowly getting bits and pieces through the main POVs. So yeah. Last question before I have a couple of spoiler questions that I'll throw the other banner up for in a minute. But for you kind of talked about Hills of Heather and Bone. What is next for you as an author? That plus?
Yes. So yeah, Hills of Heather and Bone, that's my main project besides book 2 of Grinning Assassin's trilogy, which is The Women of Steel and Scars. I had gotten a lot of traction on it last year, and then just kind of took a break because editing and revising 2 books at the same time is indeed not a smart idea. So authors who can release things very quickly, that is not me. So I'm so sorry. But it will be out before Rothfuss's last book is. So I can guarantee that.
Right,
unless he comes out and surprises us all. But it's been years. So slowly working through book 2 revisions to get that ready for beta readers. I'm working on a couple short stories, maybe another poetry book. I don't know. I can always tell when I'm on a deadline, because my brain will be like, let's do this story idea. It's like, we can't, because then nothing's going to get done.
Yep.
I took this detour with this one book because, I mean, honestly, it came out a whole lot quicker than book 2, which also took about 8 years to write and get to this point. So I'm like, we're just gonna release something.
Yep. So you said Hills of Heather and Bone is kind of May-ish?
May-ish, yeah. Because I would really like to enter it into Spiffbo. We'll see how it does. I'm not hoping for anything. If it just gets entered, I'm like, hey, that's great. It's there.
Yep.
But it hopefully will be ready by May. So
nice.
And then hoping to do a cover reveal in March. So there's that. I'm very proud of this cover.
Yeah, because you have the cover for that one done already, right?
I also did a lot of interior art as well, more so in this book than Assassin. So I'm really excited for that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I keep showing this off everywhere, but one of the things I love a good, beautiful interior on a book, and, like, this one's just see if I can find one of the chapter headings here. Well, the map is also quite beautiful. So can you, where did the map come from?
Oh, a friend of mine from college actually does maps. He goes by the handle Ancient Mariner, I think 1115 Sheridan, Falconberry. Very good. He also did my map for Hills of Heather and Bone. So he took my very awful map and made it something so much better. I wish I had originally thought of not having the crease in the middle because I didn't think that far ahead.
Yep.
So there she goes.
I need a bigger stand because this book is
she chunky. It's a chunky book. Not as chunky as it had been. So because it originally was 200,000 words and then really cut it down.
Wow.
Yeah, we went up and then really pared it down. So
yeah. So is the interior the same in both the paperback and the hardcover version?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't think to do it differently like Chiako did. I was like, oh, that's smart. To get people to buy the hardcover, I should do that.
I'm so glad that I got the hardcover. It's beautiful.
The hardcover, I was really happy with how it turned out, just despite all of my issues. Because I will say, launching that book was the most stressful out of any books I ever did. Because that was actually the one, not gonna say I cared the most about, but I really did care about the most for it, because it did not launch the time it was supposed to. It sat in Amazon forever. So the ebook released on the 28th of October in 2021, and then that week Barnes & Noble's like, hey, we can't print this, there's an issue with your interior files. And then Amazon, the paperback, they were just like, they had no, like, it sat there for like a month and a half before they were like, oh, it's a system error, you're just going to have to delete that and start again. I'm like, cool, awesome. So that was really stressful, but I had to change
a month and a half to tell me that.
Thank you for that. So I felt, if you want to know how to do a launch really bad, I know how. And the Amazon ones, originally the white pattern was all, I had done all black on them, and then they were like, well, we can't print that. I'm like, you didn't tell me that before. They're like, well, on a proof copy it's not an issue. I'm like, you could have helped me a little bit. They were much better though than Amazon, because you can talk to a real person through Barnes and Noble, whereas Amazon just kind of bounces through. They're like, have you tried these questions? It's like, yes, this is not any of those questions. So
have you unplugged your book and plugged it back in?
Have you done that? Did you do this correctly? It's like, well, I guess so. After all of that, it finally came in.
Well, the final product is beautiful, so it did turn out okay at the end.
Yes, it is definitely slow start.
Kaiju, you will not regret it. I really enjoyed it. It's a great twist on a female assassin archetype. Yeah, Kay, you have it too, I think, right? Thought I was the only one who plugged it. Well, I do now because I have an e-reader. That is a new experience for me, to plug my book in so that it charges, so that I can read more.
I have a Kindle, but it's been broken for a while, so I just read on my phone.
Oh man, I have so many friends who do that, and I'm like, I don't know how you guys like look at a screen that small. It would drive me nuts.
Well, I adjust the font so you can make it really large.
No, but still, then you're just reading like 2 sentences at a time, and
I don't know. Yeah, it was free, so there's that.
Yeah, that's fair. If anybody has any other questions, spoiler free, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to do that. And then we will shift over to spoilers in a second. Hey, Mike, yes, female assassin with a twist.
There's more than one.
Yes, there are multiples.
Yeah, there's multiples.
Yes. I'm counting in my head. 3?
Yeah.
Yeah, 3.
I think so for now. Maybe.
Unless I'm missing somebody. I think that's right.
I might be missing someone. I know of 3. There's more.
I think there are 3.
Anyone could be an assassin.
Never know.
Don't know if they're trained. So.
Waiting for Rizwana to like throw off the.
That is a theory. That is a theory. So
I'm here for that. Yeah, Mike, great book, and feel free to watch the replay. We're gonna head into spoilery section in a minute, but John wants to know if there are ever going to be orcs in the book.
Not this series, but I do have some short story ideas that might feature an orc or two. So I will let you know. Honestly, you're the one who inspired me to write a book with orcs.
That's
So
awesome. It's
it
funny
was not a thing I
because
ever thought I would do.
I like stories about orcs as much as the next person, but yeah, John also brought it to my attention. I was like, orcs are kind of
Well,
cool.
actually, I also think you brought up minotaurs, so I was like, we should do something with that.
Yeah, working on it.
Short stories. Short stories.
Oh,
I don't think I have time for longer
yeah.
stories. I
Well,
say.
I'm writing a 500-page short story that may have minotaur
Yeah,
creatures in it. So just throwing that
that's
out
what.
there.
Well, Hills of Heather and Bone was supposed to be a novella, but I overshot by 60,000 words. So
Yeah, just
there's
a little
that.
bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. It's
Just
a
a
very
little
long
bit.
novella.
It's fine. Yeah, John, I'm sold. Yep, orc short stories, minotaurs. I mean, mine are like not minotaurs because they're a species based on that, but yeah, they're close enough. Thank you for hanging out with us, Kay. I'm going to make us a new banner.
Okay.
Just so everyone knows and no one can blame me if they hear something they're not supposed to. So this is the last call for everyone. If you haven't read the book yet, or if you care about spoilers, this is me talking really slowly to give you time to jump off the live stream, because I'm going to ask Katie a couple of burning spoiler questions that I've been very excited to talk to her about. Well, that's cool, John.
Nice.
So I feel like we should have the Jeopardy music. We need Alan for the Jeopardy music while we're waiting for everybody. Okay, you have been warned. Spoilers incoming. So I'm actually gonna jump. Let's see, where do I want to start with this? Okay, one of the creepiest scenes in this book that I absolutely loved, speaking of
I think I know which one you're talking about.
necromancy. Thanks for joining us, Derek. Glad you could stop by. So speaking of necromancy, the scene in the tomb
Yes.
was fabulous. I loved it so much. I'm trying to remember. It felt like a familiar scene. Like, I don't know if I was getting like Mines of Moria vibes or something, but oh, it was so good. I loved, and I think that was one of those moments where Ramesses was the right character to have involved in that moment, because like I could just feel this poor boy.
Yeah, so that was a scene that was added fairly like recently towards the finalized draft that was never in the original ones. But I was like, we need to add some more tension here, and let's figure out how to make Ramesses uncomfortable. So I was like, all right, they're gonna hop into a crypt with some dead people and some rats,
dead relatives,
some dead relatives and rats, and I was just like, this is not going to be fun for him, but it's okay. So I don't know. It was just I really enjoyed that scene just because it made him uncomfortable. The poor guy.
Yeah, it was pretty great. Also, one of the things that I really loved that was kind of one of those moments of normalcy sections was the older couple that Uriah and Ramesses visit. And the names are escaping me, but
I think it's Regia and Bakir.
Yes,
it was so right.
Wholesome, and I love that was kind of like the father and mother figure kind of found family moment for the boys. That was really cool.
Yeah, they also were a recent addition. I remember how it came about. One of the people in my writing group was like, they're on this person's house. Does anyone like own the house? Like, whose house is this? I'm like, all right, we're going to create some new characters then. And so that's how it kind of evolved. And I was like, all right, well, Ramesses is going out in the city and he, wanting to explore. So of course he's going to like talk to people because he's that kind of person. So I'm like, let's have this wonderful couple, which I will use in other books. So they have importance that was hinting at a little bit. And so I was like, okay, that solves an issue I had in end of book 2, beginning of book 3. So I was like, okay, that's awesome. Because I wasn't thinking about them. But then I was like, I like them. I like having an older normal couple. So, and it was also to highlight, like, in this world and this kingdom that, you know, it's not all these people who are, you know, bad. It's just a culture that maybe has been misguided by one ruler, as it often unfortunately does. So it was like there are these characters who don't, you know, have the same anger, animosity, or any of the things that they've been told and the lies that have been spread. So it's just like they're just normal people going about their day, because I think sometimes that's underrated in fantasy.
Yes.
Unless they're peasants that are killed, and then we're like, oh no, it's sad, the lower class is being slaughtered, but it's fine, because we got a quest to do. So I was just like, all right, let's have just some normal people going about their day.
They kind of bring the wisdom of like age, which is probably part of why it's, you know, they're able to still, we're just living our life, because we've seen probably multiple rulers, and we've seen like full circles of things, and I really, really liked them. And I have to ask, because at the very end of the book, you definitely hint at some possible future relationship potential, being very like just a little bit, with Serain and Uriah. Am I reading into that correctly?
I think you are.
Okay, good.
I have to really figure out. It'll be a slow burn something. We don't know what. So I think the bigger question would be, if it is more of a romance, what is going to make Serain kind of really lean into that? Because she's not going to be, it's not going to be one of those things. And so for him, I think Uriah is like also asking the question of like, why do I like this person in this way? And why does my heart feel this way? So really just answering those questions, and
just
because
Uriah having a deep think about something.
He's having a really deep think about more anxiety inducing things in his life. So those are definitely things that will be explored a little bit more in book 2, but probably not explained until book 3. So it's a ride for sure. But I'm excited for their relationship, because it was like, I definitely wanted to at least move into the friendship stage, because it's like at this point we have to kind of.
Well, and it's funny because I'm typically not a massive fan of romance in books, because so often it's like, you know, it's more of a plot element than anything, or it happens too fast or whatever. So I always know it's a good sign when there's a hint of that, and I'm like, yep, I'm cool with it, because like you'd given us so much time with these characters, and we weren't relying on a relationship between them in order to care about any of them. We were really giving them the space to be completely separate from that. And now like the hint of even that could be a future thing was much more palatable, I guess. So I'm here for it.
I mean, that was also the thing I wanted to consider. I'm like, okay, when can I track maybe when feelings are starting to change? And usually in fantasy, it's always like someone rescues something, or they have like this moment. It's like, okay, but what if one character does not do that? like I'm like, okay, I want it to be frustrating for both the reader and for character who maybe is like, okay, what's happening? But it's like we still want a little bit of growth for Serain, but it's not going to be like a huge thing, because it's years and years of stuff that is slowly having to be untangled, and then she's got her own goals and, you know, doesn't see the need. So it's just really, when will she start to see the need for other people? And so that is the long-term goal for this character that I really wanted to do. So I'm always a fan of slow burn, but like you said, like I love a romance where it's like, okay, at the end of the book, if I'm wanting them to get together and nothing's happened, then that's a good sign for me, because I care about these characters, and, you know, stuff's starting to happen. I want it to move.
So, and correct me if I'm pronouncing, it's Xanthus, right? That's
I think it's like Kansas, but with the Z. My autocorrect always hated me. They're like, it's
Xanthus.
Kansas. It's like, no, it's not.
It's not,
It's not
sorry.
this. Kansas.
Canvas, Kansas. Yeah, Microsoft Word always loves us when we put in those fantasy names. So was there any inspiration specifically for him as a character, like that you took from other villains, antagonists that you've been inspired by, or was he just kind of an embodiment of evil, or like what was kind of the character design for him?
So most of it I would have to say, came from Kilgrave from Jessica Jones.
Mm,
I was like, I really hated the character, but I was really fascinated by him
mhm,
just because, we get the side from the one character. We get it from Jessica's POV, and then we start to, see, he's a deeply damaged character who thinks he's doing good. And there are moments where you're like, okay, I can see a little bit of humanity. And then I
mm,
was like, but let's take another character and just, just make him a psychopath. So really the framework was there of, he is a deeply damaged character that has his own views of things. And again, we don't really know his motives right now because Serene doesn't know his motives because he's very manipulative and all these things. So just, I wanted, someone truly you could hate. And
mhm,
like, we cannot empathize with this person because he has no empathy.
mm,
And even any of the hurt he might be displaying in certain moments, it's like it's not necessarily a genuine thing.
yeah,
So I don't know. I wanted a villain that was actually like really scary.
yeah. Well, good
In the
job.
sense that you can't relate to him because sometimes people are like, oh, he's so hot, and oh, I'm just like, no.
That's another like assassin trope. I feel like is when you get
It's like,
the
no, he's
like,
gross and
yeah,
awful.
psychopath
So
killer.
yeah, that one scene in particular, like 3/4 of the way through the book was really, that was one of my prouder moments with my beta readers where they're like, I was not seeing that was gonna come. I was like, that's the point. Because it's been building, but then when he shows up, it's just, yeah, and she does not get her revenge on him, unfortunately. So that is the
Mhm,
added stress of, okay, my fears are realized and he's there.
mhm.
So now what? We've
Well, and
got
you
we've got
lead it.
problem A with Sethos, and now we've got the main problem with Xanxus. So
Am I the problem?
am I the problem? No.
Well, and that's part of, you really pull off so many slow burn elements in this, one of which is, if we move into a romance at some point, you've
Mhm.
obviously achieved that, but also just the tension of Xanxus kind of like hovering over our shoulder the whole time, and him going from this kind of mythos like shadow character that we're only hearing about through Serene's fear and trauma, and then he becomes a flesh and blood character, and it, like, sometimes that makes them less scary. I feel like with Xanxus it doesn't, which is what I
Mhm.
really liked about how you wrote his character, was like he was just as scary in the flesh here in front of us as he was when he was like hovering over our shoulder and the tension was there.
Yeah, I wanted him to definitely be one of those villains that's like, okay, he is a serious threat and
Yeah.
not just, oh well, he's
Mhm.
there. Because
Yep.
I mean, if he could have been killed, it probably would have happened by now.
Right.
So yes. But then also just the fact of, he's so inexplicably tied to her backstory of, at one point, it seemed like, okay, this is someone who's protecting me, this is someone who's, saved me from a terrible situation. And so just to also have that, kind of hurt and betrayal, and then also frustration with her own self of, why did I ever trust this person?
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, are there any other spoilery things that you wanna add before we wrap up?
mm. Oh yes, um her children. Yes, that was that was the other like big
That
thing.
surprised me. That surprised me.
I was really, I don't remember how it came about with that, but I think I knew on like an earlier draft, I'm like, what is something like we don't see a whole lot is like mother characters, especially for assassins. It's usually like there's no one in the life. And so
Yeah.
I was just like, these are children that came about from an unfortunate circumstance, but these are, her whole world. And to be separated from that for so long, but also knowing like there are all these other dangers that have kept us separate, like how is that going to impact this character? And that is ultimately her kind of big moral dilemma between like revenge and family. And so I really love those dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, someone was like, are they actually alive? I'm like, yes, they are alive. That would be a really fun and sad twist
It
if they were
would.
not. But they are alive, they exist. Um, so I just really liked the exploration of kind of a mother character,
Yeah.
but she's not maternal towards
Right.
anyone else really. Although she starts
Yeah.
to kind of warm up to Racema and kind of has that little bit of protectiveness of like, okay, she's someone innocent. I can see myself in her.
When
And
she has
there are
the
some,
tiger cub.
yes. I was like, we got to have an animal companion somewhere. So I'm like, here's a baby. Yeah, and I was really it really took a while just to figure out, like, because when I said Sun and Stars, like, in the beginning, I was like, "That seems too Game of Thrones," but I was like, "Oh, and also not." So that was, like, the big dilemma because 'cause I'm like, "Well, it's got, actual symbolism that I
Right.
know about, and not everyone does until later." So that was another thing just to kinda stick to of, like, when when can we start to reveal, like, names of
Mhm.
that? Because it's like, well, I wanted people to think maybe it was a lover or something like that, and them
That
to
was
be
my
like,
first
"Nope."
thought, and I was like it was funny because that was my first thought, and then I was like, "But that doesn't really, like, fit with what I'm seeing in
Mhm,
Serene," and I'm like I was trying to figure out, like yeah, I had no idea where you were gonna go with that. Then
mhm,
I thought maybe it was, like, a sibling or siblings. So, yeah, I was definitely surprised by there is a point, though, at some point where you mentioned stretch marks.
mhm,
And that was for me as a mom, that was one of my first, like, "Wait a second." Not that, like, she couldn't have
mhm.
had them without having kids, but at the same time, it was
Yeah.
just, like, one of those, "Okay, this is
Yeah,
now
that
a
was, like,
possibility."
the first real hint I put. I'm like, "Okay, either people who are paying attention are really gonna pick up on it, or they're just gonna be like, well, she's emaciated, so she's just lost a bunch of weight, and so these could just be left over from
Yeah,
everything." So,
yeah,
that was, like, one of the first real hints I put in.
mhm, yeah. Yeah, I thought there were some really good, like, reveals that took me off guard, not in a way that felt like it didn't make sense. It was just like, "Oh, wow, okay, I wasn't expecting that, but now I see it," you know? Um, I always appreciated um, the oh gosh, like the political parties and
Mm.
how side note, but how the Serene trying really hard to fit in with the like all of these party goers and the upper crust of the kingdom and Ramesses just kind of flitting through society.
He's a party
He's a
person,
party
and
boy.
that part of me was given to both Uriah and Serene of parties are awkward unless there's food. So,
That's true.
I
Yeah.
too am like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that was everything I had specifically for spoiler notes. If I think of any other ones, I will DM you later. but um but yeah, I thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book and for writing it. I really enjoyed getting to read it this last year. Um did I finish it in January? I think I finished it in January.
Yes, I think
Um
so.
yeah. So yeah, but that was one of the things, and I talked about this in my review too, that slowing down with this book was really fun because I really was getting a lot of the descriptions and the colors and we didn't even talk about the colors. That's a
Yeah,
whole other thing.
synesthesia. Yeah.
Um, because I liked how you had the continuity of like the little bell earrings, but also the city bell, which are both technically the same sound, just different, and how they were the same color. And I started. It was fun to kind of look for those threads of continuity through the colors. That was cool.
That was a hard thing for sure because 'cause I'm
I
like, "Well,
bet.
there's no, there's no blueprint to go off of that, unfortunately, because it's so specialized to each individual. So I'm like, okay, well, wooden objects are maybe going to have a sound that's different than another wooden object. And so how are we going to do this without it being
Mhm.
like too repetitive? So really went to the Crayola crayon box and just that was the hardest part of finding like what color is going to exist in this time of the world, because macaroni yellow is not a thing.
Right.
So I had to knowing all the different words for blue, and that's where working at a hardware store where I had to mix paint kind of helped,
Mm,
because I'm like, well,
mhm,
there's a lot of shades of white. So
mhm.
and
Yep.
just having fun playing with those colors of, like Zanzis's voice is white, which is usually associated with purity. And so I'm like, no,
Mm,
it's not a good color, and there's really no rhyme or reason for why the color is there all the time.
mhm.
So just that was another glossary that took a while. I'm like, because I'm not gonna remember. And especially with, different materials and everything, of how is that gonna change everything without being too overwhelming. And at some point I was like, well, I want the reader to be a little annoyed and overwhelmed, because yeah, there's a lot of colors going around. So
Mhm,
loud cities are probably not going to be very fun. Like, I can only imagine, even if it's something you're used to, it's just like to
mhm.
have that visual kind of sensory overload, I think would have to be a little bit much at
Yeah.
some point.
Oh,
So
yeah.
trying to weave that in as best as I could for this character of, she can utilize it for her own game, but it's not a special skill. It's just what she's got. Because I had a lot of questions about that of like, is it magical? What's the point of it? I'm like, well, the crumb stage is just there. She has
Mhm.
it. And
Yeah.
there's no word for it in this culture, because it's not. I mean, how do you tell people, "Hey, I see colors and sounds, and don't burn me at the stake, it's fine."
Right? Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I can imagine that was a glossary that would I can't even imagine how you kept it all straight.
Alf that was my biggest regret of not starting that sooner. I
Mm,
only started that within the last couple years before publication, of like, "Okay, we need to go back and look at every color, sound, and see what is happening." And
yep.
so did the best I could and provided it for readers, because I'm like, if I'm going to forget, I'm sure everyone else is going to forget.
Yes. Yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and look at it now. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for doing the interview and for coming on the channel. And I'm very excited to read book 2 when it comes out. And beta reading Hills of Heather and Bone. Looking forward to that. So yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me this evening.
Yeah, thank you for having me and reading the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, again, if you are still here and you haven't gone down to the description below, Katie's website and the Amazon link to Assassin of Grins and Secrets is down there. I also have a full video review of the book up on my channel. It's one of the last couple of videos that I've posted. I will try to remember to put a link to that as well down in the description. But yeah, if you haven't checked out this book yet, definitely add it to your TBR, because it's an awesome twist on female assassins, and I'm here for it. So, thank you everybody for hanging out with us, and we will see you in the next video. This is the part where we wave until the the circle